Take a parked bicycle and lean it a little too far, it drops with almost no dignity. Start rolling that same bike, give it a wobble, and suddenly it has options. The front wheel twitches, the path bends, the fall can get caught. The famous answer says the spinning wheels act like gyroscopes. That answer survived because it touches something real, but it is too small. A moving bike stays up because a lean can be turned into steering, and that steering can move the support back under the mass again. A bicycle is not escaping gravity. It is getting another chance before gravity wins. The gyroscope story feels right the first time you touch it. Pick up a spinning bicycle wheel by its axle and try to twist it. It pushes back in your hands. That is not a myth. A spinning wheel really does resist having its axis redirected. So when people say a bike stays up because the wheels are gyroscopes, they are not inventing a force. They are taking one real effect and giving it the whole job. That shortcut held on for a long time because it is satisfying. It gives you one visible cause. Spin equals stability. Done. It also survives because the detached wheel demo is dramatic and the full bicycle is not. A loose wheel in your hands announces itself. Trail does not. Mass placement does not. Speed windows definitely do not. So the public memory keeps the loud part and drops the quiet parts. Then the hard evidence got awkward. In 2011, Arend Koeijman, Jaap Meijat, Andy Ruiner, and colleagues built a special riderless bicycle for a paper in Science Asterix. It was not a normal city bike. It was a proof of principle machine built to test the old story properly. The front wheel's usual gyroscopic contribution was cancelled with counter-rotating wheels. The front-end geometry was changed too, including reversing the usual positive trail. And within a narrow speed range, that strange bike could still recover from a small disturbance and roll itself upright again. That result did not prove that ordinary bikes ignore wheel spin. It did not prove trail is useless either. What it proved is simpler and more interesting. No single effect owns the whole balance problem. Gyroscopic forces help. On normal bikes, they are part of the feel, but they are part of a team. The full answer has more pieces. The front wheel can steer under a lean. The fork geometry can make that steering happen in a helpful direction. The mass of the front assembly can change how the whole front end responds. Speed changes whether the rescue works quickly enough, and a real rider is adding tiny corrections the whole time. So the public myth was not completely wrong. It was badly undersized. That matters because the better picture is something you can actually carry around. A bike is not being held upright by one hidden bodyguard. It is a coupled machine with several ways to turn the start of a fall into a path that catches the mass again. Once that clicks, the next question changes. If wheel spin is only one helper, what is the bike actually doing at the moment it starts to go over? Start with a broom balanced upright on your palm. The way to save it is not to hold the top still by force. You move your hand under the part that is falling. That is the control logic to keep in your head. When an unstable thing leans, the rescue is often about moving the support. Get the base back under the mass and you buy time. Miss that move and the lean gets worse. On a bicycle, the support is where the tires touch the ground. And the way a moving bike shifts that support is by steering. Imagine the bike starts leaning left. If the front wheel turns so the bike's path bends left as well, the contact points begin sliding back under the combined bike and rider mass. Now the machine is not just tipping like a rigid plank. It is changing where the ground support lives. You can see the stripped-down version on a balance bike or even a small scooter. The rider is not staying up by locking their body into one perfect pose. They keep putting the rolling base where the falling mass is headed. A bicycle does the same kind of save, only faster and with more of the correction hidden in the front wheel's path. That is why the best plain language answer is that a bike catches its own fall by steering under it. It is not a perfect slogan for every instant of every design. Real bikes depend on speed, geometry, tires, and rider input. But as a public picture, it is the right center of gravity. Balance is mostly a steering problem. You can see a clue to this every time someone makes a quick left turn. The bars often get a tiny nudge right first. That brief move lets the bike lean left, and then the front end steers into the new path. Riders do little versions of that all the time without narrating it to themselves. Even when a cyclist looks smooth, the bike is full of small steering saves. That is also why body movement by itself is not the whole answer. You can shift your torso, sure, but the actual catch still has to happen at the contact patch. At some point, the support on the ground needs to move, so the bike stays up by being allowed to respond. It is not winning by staying rigid. It is winning by correcting where it stands. Now the mystery gets sharper. If steering is the rescue move, why does the front wheel so often help instead of just flopping whichever way chaos feels like today? Look closely at the front end of an ordinary bike, and one detail matters more than it first appears. Draw the steering axis down toward the ground. On many bicycles, that imaginary line hits the ground a little ahead of the front tire's contact patch. The patch sits behind it. That distance has a name later. First, just picture the gap. That gap means the front wheel is not touching the ground directly under the steering axis. When the bike leans and the front end loads up in a new way, the geometry can encourage the wheel to steer in a direction that helps the bike recover. Now we can name the gap. It is trail. Trail is why people reach for the shopping cart caster analogy. A caster wheel trails behind its pivot, so it tends to line up with the direction of motion. That is a useful first hint, but only a hint. A bicycle front end is doing that job while attached to a tall moving mass, with tire forces, with a tilted steering axis, and with a spinning wheel in front. It is a richer machine than a supermarket trolley. That steering axis tilt matters more than it sounds. If the axis were perfectly vertical, the front end would answer a lean differently. Tilt it back, place the contact patch behind the axis, and the wheel has a better chance of turning into a path that helps the bike recover rather than simply folding away underneath it. Still, the family resemblance is real enough to help. Because the contact patch sits behind the steering axis, and because that axis is tilted, a lean can create torques and forces that turn the bars in a helpful direction. Then the wheel traces a path that begins moving the support back under the mass. That is why the fork is not just a bracket for holding a wheel on. It is part of the rescue system. The 2007 benchmark paper by Maillard, Papadopoulos, Ruina, and Schwab put this on firmer mathematical footing. Bicycle balance is a coupled lean steer problem. The geometry is part of the coupling. Change the geometry, and you change how the bike answers a lean. But this is another place where one clean measurement can become a bad myth. Trail matters a lot on many bikes. It is not the whole answer. Different designs and speeds change how much help it gives, and the bike still has other levers to work with, which takes us to the hidden one. Even if two bikes had the same wheel and the same basic fork shape, the balance story could still change if you moved where the front end mass lives. The 2011 experiment was not a magic trick where engineers deleted gyroscopes and watched the bike shrug. They redesigned the machine. That is the right way to hear the result. Yes, the usual front wheel gyroscopic contribution was cancelled. Yes, the usual positive trail was reversed. But the front assembly was also built so its mass sat in places that changed how lean and steer interacted. The strange bike still had a front end with weight, inertia, and geometry. It was a different layout, not an absence of layout. This is easy to miss because mass distribution sounds like dry engineering bookkeeping. On a bicycle, it is not dry at all. The front assembly is a moving chunk of matter mounted around the steering axis. When the bike leans and the steering starts to respond, the location of that mass changes what the front end wants to do next. Put weight in one place and a lean produces one style of response. Put it elsewhere and the same lean can feed into steer differently. That was one of the big lessons of the 2011 design. Other stabilizing levers can carry more of the load when the familiar ones are reduced. You can hear the difference between removed the magic ingredient and changed the recipe. The second one is what the paper actually gave us. The strange riderless bike worked because the whole front end had been arranged to answer a disturbance differently. That is a lesson about interaction, not about one famous force being fake. So gyroscopes busted is the lazy version. The stronger version is that bicycle balance lives in the whole front end layout. Maillard's benchmark model helps here too. The bike is not a pile of separate tricks. Lean, steer, speed, wheel spin, and mass placement are tied together. Pull one lever and the rest of the response changes with it. That is why a bicycle can feel less like a rigid object and more like a negotiation. The machine is always redistributing a fall. Geometry shapes the move, front-end mass shapes the move, wheel spin shapes the move. None of those parts gets to act alone, and even a beautifully arranged bike does not behave the same way at every speed. A rescue that works at one pace can fail at another. So the next correction is about timing. Stability is not something motion switches on forever. It lives inside a speed window. Think about the hardest moment in ordinary riding. It is often the start. Those first shaky meters feel different for a reason. At very low speed, a steering correction does not move the support under the mass fast enough. The bike begins to lean, you steer, but the path change is small and late. Gravity keeps collecting its debt. That is why crawling along can feel awkward even for someone who rides well. The balance system has less room to work. As speed comes up, some bicycles enter a much friendlier region. Small lean steer responses have enough forward motion to turn into useful path changes. On certain designs, in a certain range, a riderless bike can even recover from a small disturbance by itself. That narrow idea has a name, self-stable, and it is worth keeping that name narrow. Self-stable does not mean balanced in every situation. It does not mean pleasant to ride. It does not mean immortal if you take your hands off. It means an uncontrolled riderless bicycle, within some speed band, can return toward upright motion after a small perturbation. That is already a much tighter claim than everyday language usually makes. It also helps separate three ideas people blur together all the time. A bike can be rideable because a human can control it well. A bike can be balanced because the rider keeps correcting it. And a bike can be self-stable in the stricter research sense only if it helps itself, unridden in a limited range. Those are related ideas, not interchangeable ones. Go faster still, and the story does not become a straight line toward perfect safety. The benchmark work and later studies, including Bulsink and colleagues in 2015, describe different instability modes at different speeds. You do not need the full equations to get the point. A bike can have one style of wobble in one regime and a slower drifting failure in another. Engineers call those weave and capsize modes, so motion helps, but it helps conditionally. There is no single magic threshold speed for all bicycles. Geometry changes the window. Tires change the window. Rider properties change the window. But the adult version of the answer is clear. Stability is a region on the map, not a switch on the wall. That makes real riding easier to understand. Smooth cruising feels easier because the bike has better tools available there. Slow starts feel twitchy because the tools are weaker, and high-speed confidence is still not pure passive magic. Because by the time a human is on the bike, another control system has joined the machine. The rider is closing the loop. Watch an experienced cyclist from a distance and the tempting thought is that they are barely doing anything. The measurements say otherwise. Kane, Ashton Miller, and Perkins measured balancing riders and found small, constant corrections in steer angle, steer rate, and steer torque even when the ride looked smooth. Later control work by Dialinus and by Maris treated the rider the way engineers treat any feedback system, sensing lean and speed, feeling the handlebar, accepting a short delay, then feeding correction back into the steering. That means ordinary cycling is not the bike doing everything by itself. It is also not the rider overpowering the bike by sheer skill. It is cooperation. The machine already has tendencies. Lean couples to steer. Geometry can help. Wheel spin can help. The rider reads what the system is doing and nudges it before the fall gets expensive. And those nudges are usually tiny. That is why good riding looks calm. Smooth control hides the work instead of removing it. This also clears up another half-true idea. People often say riders balance by shifting their body weight. That matters, but mostly because it feeds the steering-based correction rather than replacing it. You are not holding the frame upright by telekinesis from the saddle. The save still has to happen where rubber meets road. Which brings the tires back into the story. All of this beautiful lean steer torque becomes real at the contact patch. That little area of tire touching the ground is where the steering correction turns into an actual force and an actual new path. Road texture matters there. Tire behavior matters there. Arm stiffness matters there. The bike in the lab equations and the bike on a rough street are not the same thing even when the core mechanism is, and the contact patch is not a mathematical dot in real life. The tire deforms, the road pushes back unevenly. The rider feels those changes through the bars and answers them. So the everyday feeling of "this bike is stable" is really a conversation between the frame, the fork, the wheels, the rubber, the road, and the nervous system on top. Bolsink's work makes that realism harder to ignore. Rider properties and tire behavior can shift the stability picture. So can disturbances from the surface. The basic explanation survives. The street version is just messier, and that mess does not weaken the main idea. It sharpens it. A real bicycle stays up because falling, steering, geometry, wheel spin, mass placement, speed, tires, and rider control are all talking to one another through the contact patch. Sometimes the bike can help itself for a while. Most of the time, a rider is quietly helping it do that better. So the miracle is not that a bicycle never falls. The miracle is that it can keep turning the start of a fall into another chance to recover. Go back to the parked bike. Lean it too far, and it is finished almost at once. No forward motion, no path change, no rescue. Now give that same machine speed. Suddenly a lean can become steering. Steering can move the support back under the mass. Fork geometry can help that happen. Wheel spin can help. Front-end mass can help. The useful speed range matters. The tires make the whole argument touch the road. And on a real ride, the human on top is closing the loop with a stream of tiny corrections. What looked like a simple everyday machine turns out to be a very fast conversation between gravity and control, happening while you barely notice it. So a bicycle stays up because motion lets it redirect falling into recovery. It is not refusing to fall. It is learning how to keep catching the fall before it finishes.